Wesch, Lesson 6, Part 8. Right. So even though race is not really a biological fact, it's a social fact. And we know that because people have different outcomes, health outcomes, economic outcomes, etc., based on their, uh, um, their race. So African Americans were prevented between the 1930s and the 1970s from buying houses cheaply. I said that, and you were like, "What?" No, it's true. Here, check this out. Um, it's called redlining, and what it basically means is that even if you have a high enough income and you can afford the house payments, and you have 3% or 5% or 10% down on that house, you cannot buy it. What is going on here with my site? The site's not working. Oh, well. No, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. Be patient. Okay, so say you're living in Hamilton and you want to buy a house. They're not gonna. The bank will not lend you money. I mean, the bank would lend you money, of course. You come up with 20% down. The bank's gonna say, "Sure, take it." You've got you've got a regular paycheck, and so but this is not for those people. This is not for the rich people who have that kind of cash sitting around. This is for ordinary working people. If you want to live in Hamilton and you live in the blue or the green areas, then you're going to get the best rates. If you live in the yellow area, it's going to be a question. But let's click on the best area here. This is Hamilton, Ohio, the green part, exclusively by wealthier citizens and those with higher incomes. Oh, let's show the scan. Goodness, we got to see what the original people said. Here it is. We zoom in. Oh, wow. Okay. So, area characteristics. Hold on. Goodness. Rolling to hilly, not too far distant from principal business citizens, large, wealthy homes, no transportation. This is not a detrimental influence because they have cars. Occupation, capitalist, business, and professional men. Uh, Estimated annual family income, $6,000 and up. Foreign-born families, none. Blank predominating. Negro, none. No percentage. So 0%. That's key, is that there's no black people living there. Um, if there are black people living there, then you get rejected. Let's look at the yellow part here. The yellow part, slightly clerical, business, mechanics, laborers, Negro, none. So you can still get a loan here. What happens is when you get into these red areas, this is the red line. This is the actual map from 1940 or whatever. And if you see the scan there, it's going to say um, Negro, yes, 40%. But once it says yes, it doesn't matter whether it's 1% or 99%, it's still rejected. So if you are a black family and you have a pretty decent income, and you have 10% down, and the bank says, yeah, we'll give you money if you find a house, and you go to here, or here or here, and you try to buy a house there, they're going to say, you do realize you are black. And they go, well, of course. Well, if you buy a house in this neighborhood, it's going to change that 0% to 1% or 0.5% or whatever. It's not going to be zero anymore. And once it does that, then you're no longer eligible. Nobody in this neighborhood is eligible for an FHA loan. So the only place where you can go where you're not going to be rejected by your neighbors is to the red place. And it just so happens that the red place is also the place where FHA loans will not be given. Okay? So it's a catch-22. Technically, it's not racist, but effectively it really is. It never mentions race, except to say, if there's a greater than 0% Negro, then the loans are, these are undesirable lands. So anyway, so that's the law. That's what the law was up until the 1970s, and that is why today African Americans do not have near the wealth that white people do, because they didn't have access to those loans. Education and social class. I mean, after 1973, the hourly wages just have stagnated. So there's you no longer have that opportunity. That closed around the same time. Just so happens, coincidentally, that once they got rid of all the good wages, they also got rid of all the cheap houses. Um, Based on redlining, a cheap house is just for white people. A federal law. Okay. So education and social class. Since education funding has been dependent on property values, the better funded schools were closer to all white neighborhoods, while non all white neighborhoods had worse schools, even apart from formal segregation. Okay, and this is why de facto segregation is worse today than de jure segregation ever was up until the 1950s, when there were all those schools there. Now, implicit bias is another thing. So that is a explicit bias, laws against it, but there's implicit bias as well. At a glance, continues to determine people's destiny. So Negroes in Oregon, Negroes see also crime and criminals in Portland, right? Just automatically, that's what pops up when you think of that. Why? Because of implicit bias. So implicit bias doesn't say, oh, you're black, therefore you're a bad person. Implicit bias says, when I see black faces, I feel, and when I see white faces, I think, right? It's just implicit. It's not like a ugly racism. It's just implicit. The association of Americans among Americans, association among Americans of black faces with crime, lower status, and other negative stereotypes. Very difficult to avoid by anyone. You can click on there, and you come up to the implicit bias test, Project Implicit, and you can take the quiz, and it just basically shows you a series of faces, and you click, back and forth, and you find out what kind of implicit bias you have, whether you have favoring white faces or black faces. And a lot of black people have taken it and found out that they actually have negative reactions to black faces. I take it, and I actually have a slight favoring of black faces, probably due to my childhood, which was spent around exclusively black community with no white people at all. Everyone and and I was sheltered, so I was not threatened or abused or the subject of violence or anything during my early childhood. Before the age of 5, every single teacher, doctor, lawyer, judge, boss, accountant, professor, governor, police officer, every single person I saw in any position of authority who was helpful or kind to me was black, with the exception of my family and a few white missionaries who were very, very rarely in my life. So all my friends and all my friends' parents and all of their parents and grandparents and everyone. So I have this sort of just natural favorability toward that. The scary times were when I was around white people on furlough, people I didn't know, that sort of thing. So it's important to take that test and figure out what your implicit bias might be. Beliefs, behavior, structures. Again, we can go through this process and talk about this belief that blacks are prone to anger and violence. This goes back all the way to the Middle Ages. Pseudoscientific ideas about hot climates and hot tempers. But it's a belief, and it still persists in a lot of communities, especially of Europeans and Middle Easterners. Behaviors, the perceptions of race affect how people are treated. So black children receive harsher discipline in schools. People feel comfortable about policing young black men. There's overall a lack of empathy toward, if you hear of someone who made a mistake and hurt someone and got tossed in jail, you think, oh man, he's like 16 years old, poor kid. It wasn't his fault. And then you find out they're black, and they're like, oh, well, he's one of those, right? And this is not to make you feel bad, but it's just it happens among white people. There's a lack of empathy for African Americans. And then structures. So it results in structures, racism without racists, or what we call institutionalized racism, the cumulative effect of policies, systems, and processes that may not have been designed with racism in mind, which have the effect of disadvantaging certain racial groups. So think about your own family. If you junior's smoking doobies, who is likely to catch him. And if you live in a neighborhood where the average house is worth, a couple hundred, $300,000, it's much more likely that a family member or a friend will catch him smoking doobies, and not a police officer, which might be the case if he's in an apartment building, especially one heavily policed by police officers. Then it's more likely police will be the ones to discover that, and then it goes downhill from there. What's the likelihood that you will live your life and never have slept overnight in a police station, in jail? Well, if bail is $1,000 and you haven't had more than $100 uh, in your account, after paying the bills all year long, it may be you don't scrape together $1,000 for another day or two, and Junior spends 2 or 3 nights in jail, and that's just because of money. And a lot of poor people are white as well, but a lot more black people are poor, um, out of the community. Most of the poor people are white, but of the black people, many more are poor than of the white people being poor, you see. Um, and so, as a result, your race is influencing and remember, we talked about then being able to pay for a lawyer, right? Do you have $6,000 to a lawyer, and this goes away as a first offense, no felony conviction, no future ding on your record, earning capacity, being able to vote, etc. Because you have $6,000 and they submit all the paperwork, and boom, you get it. And why do you do that? Because you go to grandma and she owns the deed to her house and she puts it up and takes out $6,000 in a home equity line of credit and pays it, and you, Junior, go through all summer paying her back the interest on that, and eventually you get it all paid off. But someone who doesn't have grandma owning her own house, um, that's it. Plead guilty to a lesser conviction, but it's still felony, and or not for marijuana possession, but for whatever. And now you can't get a job for the rest of your life, and it totally affects your whole future. You can get a job, but not a good one. It's really, really difficult to come back from that. A lot of work.